Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Red Gaming Technical video, we have 3 pieces of tech news. Now, before I go into this proper, I'd like to warn you all, it is fireworks night, or very close to it in the UK, therefore there are fireworks in the background. There's not much I can do because I've been trying to stop and start the recording for a good 20 minutes now, and it's just not happening. It's just random and intermittent, so you're going to have to just make do with the odd rocket here and there. And the second is that I am still a little sick. I have been ill for the past couple of days with yet another cold, which I can only attribute to going in and out of London, so that's just a bit of a pain. So, you know, bear with me. But we do have 3 rather interesting pieces of news which have popped up over the past 24 or so hours. The first of which is the GTX 1070 and 1080 from EVGA. Now, these cards are literally catching fire, so we'll go into that in just a moment. And then we're going to focus on Nintendo Switch, because it will indeed be using a Pascal architecture, and some specifications of the GPU and its performance have also emerged. And then finally, we're going to settle on to Intel and Kaby Lake, as well as the release date, pricing, that type of thing. So I do want to very quickly tackle the GTX 1080 and 1070 thing. Now, this is specific from EVGA, although this does compound itself because just a few days ago, there was some more news popping out that several manufacturers have had GTX 1070 memory issues. For those of you who do not know, it was down to the fact that essentially several manufacturers were utilizing memory chips from Micron rather than Samsung, which isn't a problem in and of itself. Unfortunately, the Micron chips required different voltages to Samsung, and so what you started to have is this issue where certain boards were just not overclocking as well as they should, or worse still, they would be failing to run at the desired clock speed. Anyway, these manufacturers, which were EVGA, Gamewood and Pallet, to name a couple, actually released BIOS updates. But since then, another issue has emerged, and this one is, as far as I can understand, at least for now, specific to EVGA cards. And it has a very simple cause and a very simple effect, and it is overheating VRMs. Now, the too long didn't read is that the voltage regulation isn't the problem. The problem is the actual VRM design is not cooled. And so what happens is, because there is no thermal pads which are adhered to the VRMs, hot air essentially becomes trapped. And basically what you get is a thermal runaway effect. So basically the VRMs just become hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter, and it doesn't take too long, particularly if you're starting to apply overclocking or other such things, that basically the cards just quite literally pop. The VRMs quite literally pop, which means that the card themselves are useless. Now, to EVGA's credit, they are shipping out free thermal pads, which is nice. Although I do find it quite ironic that they have added, well, not ironic, that's completely the wrong word, but quite funny that they've said, and I quote, "With that being said, EVGA understands that lower temperatures are preferred by reviewers and customers." You don't say! We also prefer temperatures which don't result in fire. You know, non-combustible temperatures are probably optimum when dealing with expensive electronics. Also, they are going to be correcting the oversight, and in addition to all of that, they are going to be essentially honouring warranties, but it is still taking the piss, and I believe EVGA, don't quote me on this, had some issues with the 900 series cards as well from Nvidia, so it's definitely a bit of a black mark against them, because just a while ago I would have recommended EVGA, like let's say back in the 700 series or the 600 series, I'd have recommended them wholeheartedly. And I'm not saying to avoid them, but do treat them a little more cautiously than what you would have just, well, you know, a couple of generations ago. Now, let's talk about Switch, shall we? Switch, as you're probably aware, is the next console from Nintendo, which naturally is going to be releasing early next year. Now, excuse me one second. An individual, a Japanese journalist, pretty famous one, Nishikawa Zenji, wrote an article regarding the Nintendo Switch and possible specifications, and this appeared on 4Gamer. So some translations are already starting to swirl across the internet. Essentially what you're going to see is that the writer has said that Switch will indeed be utilizing Pascal, so Nvidia's current architecture, and not utilizing Volta. Zenji also points out that the performance floating point performance of the Switch is going to be around 1 TFLOP, and there's no possibility at all that Switch is going to hit above 1.5. That ultimately is down to the battery inside Switch. So, just to clarify, the custom chip is going to hit around 1 TFLOP, but there is no possibility at all it's going to exceed 1.5. So realistically, in a real world scenario, you're looking at between, let's say, 900 GFLOPS to 1.2 TFLOPS is probably about the ballpark for the Switch, at least according to Zenji. Furthermore, he also points out that the Switch itself could advance with Tegra architecture. Basically, this is going to be like the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, what you can pretty much read between the lines of is that as Nvidia release additional architectures over the next couple of years, so let's say as they move from Pascal to Volta, we could see another Switch, which I guess wouldn't be unheard of for Nintendo. After all, they are the same folks who have released multiple iterations of the Game Boy, multiple iterations of the 3DS, but it will be interesting how people deal with that. I guess what we'll see logically is more performance for the same battery life, which wouldn't necessarily be bad in and of itself, but obviously the PlayStation 4 has also had a little bit of a, how can we put it, negative reaction and a positive reaction. It's been very mixed. Just how accurate these reports are is down to your interpretation, as always. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if there were at least some grain of truth in them, because logically I don't think they're going to be utilising an older architecture than than Pascal. And if you did the maths, about 1 TFLOP does make an awful lot of sense. I don't really think they could go much more than that, simply because, well, battery life becomes a concern. So finally, let's talk about Kaby Lake. Kaby Lake, specifically the 7700K and the i5 7600K, have had their prices leaked to the world. So they are naturally the successor to Skylake, which is the current series of processors, well, for the average user on the PC. And naturally, we're going to be looking at different price points for these CPUs. The first CPU, the 7700K, is going to be retailing at $349 US, whereas the 7600K is going to retail at $239 US. So obviously you're paying quite a lot of a premium for the 7700K, so it depends on whether that extra little bit of boost clock, you're looking at 300 megahertz between the two, 4.5 versus 4.2. Naturally, you can overclock them, but what you can't do, of course, is enable hyperthreading on the 7600K, and you also don't get to enable that extra 2 megabytes of level 3 cache. So it's really up to you, as usual, whether you want to cough up the extra for the i7. At this point, however, you would not be very wise at all to buy Skylake, because these processors will indeed be launching on the 5th of January, along with the 200 series motherboards. Just for your FYI, the 200 series motherboards obviously have a few additional extras which you may be interested in if you are new to the next generation of processors. But if you do already have a Skylake series motherboard to a 100 series board, you can, assuming you do a BIOS upgrade, use your Kaby Lake CPU and the Skylake motherboard. But obviously just make sure that your board is supported, make sure you download the correct BIOS revision first, and do keep in mind that if you do happen to buy a cheap board off of eBay that might not necessarily have been BIOS flashed to the latest version, you might have a bit of an issue. The CPU might not be recognized when you put it into the process, into your motherboard, and therefore your PC may not post. So that could be an issue if you're buying a cheap 100 series board which has not been flashed on eBay. I'm not saying that is the case, because obviously ultimately we don't have a test sample to know that. I'm just warning people ahead of time. But it's kind of cool. My personal take, as you can probably imagine, with the 7700K and the 7600K, since we're looking at around 10% performance increase, as we've mentioned a couple of times over by now, I'm not sad about it. I don't think it's a bad processor or processor line. I just want to know what AMD are going to be countering with Zen. And with any luck at all, we'll see this instance where, for once, AMD have a really nice lead over Intel. I say for once, they've had it multiple times before with the Athlons. They had a pretty good CPU with the K3s as well, and the Athlon 64s, and a couple of other CPUs have been really nice as well, so I guess that wasn't very correct wording. Anyway, hopefully I'm going to say that you've enjoyed the video. I am going to get going because my voice is getting to the point where it's going to crack. For those of you who are asking me, because I've had a few people messaging me regarding the PlayStation 4 Pro analysis, it is currently sitting at about 4,500 words. I've been slowly writing it out while I've been sick, which hasn't been ideal because I've had really blocked sinuses, so I've had lovely headaches, which hasn't really helped much. But the article is coming on rather nicely. It's probably going to be a two-parter. I tried to squeeze it all into one part and it just wasn't happening. As I said, I'm already up to 4,500 words and I'm literally only about halfway through what I want to tackle. Because obviously I don't just want to tell you what the specs are and give my opinion, I also want to explain what things are. And so because of that, analysis stuff becomes a lot wordier than just a report thing, and therefore we're at, once again, 4,500 words, and I've not even finished the first part, so I'm going to assume it's going to be around the 5 to 5.5 after editing, which is probably going to be quite a lengthy video, and given the fact that I'm going to have to do some editing, it's probably going to be a two-parter. So I'm going to try and get that up tomorrow, possibly going to slip into the next day, depending A, how I feel, and B, what workload I've got on other things. But I think you'll enjoy it. It's comprehensive, I'm going to say that. So anyway, I'm going to get going. As usual, do the subscribe, like, share, comment, and all of that stuff. I'd greatly appreciate it. I'm going to let you all go. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.